Hey, well, welcome here. We're so glad you're here. You guys can keep standing here. You guys are home. You can still stay in your couch in your pajamas. That's fine with us. But we're glad you're here. It is good to be back. And I know you guys have been saying hi to each other here in person, but online, why don't you say hi to each other? And you can interact there during the service, which is really cool. And we are so glad you're here. We are wrapping up our series today and excited about that. But just continue to sing with us, and that'll be great.
Church, we are your sons and daughters. We're gathered here to meet with you. We left our life, we lay our hearts before you, expectant here for you to move. Lift our hands to the heavens alive in your presence, oh God. When you come, so pour out your Spirit, we love to be near you, oh God. When you come, you are the way, the truth and life we live for. Oh, how we long to know you more. With our hands to the heavens alive in your presence, oh God. When you come, so pour out your Spirit, we love to be near you, oh God. When you come, with our hands to the heavens alive in your presence, oh God. When you come, so pour out your Spirit, we love to be near you, oh God. When you come, come like a rushing wind, come like the fire again, come like a burning flame. Have your way, have your way. Come like a rushing wind, come like the fire again, come like a burning flame. Have your way, have your way. With our hands to the heavens alive in your presence, oh God. When you come, so pour out your Spirit, we love to be near you, oh God. When you come, with our hands to the heavens alive in your presence, oh God. When you come, so pour out your Spirit, we love to be near you, oh God. When you come, come like a rushing wind, come like the fire again, come like a burning flame. Have your way, have your way. Would you be seated?
There have been rumors about this building. Strange noises, hearing voices, footsteps when nobody is there, things disappearing or being moved with no explanation. So some people believe that there's been something strange going on in this building for years, but no one expected this. It seems that there's been a murder. Mr. Body is just found here, apparently a victim of foul play. there's just a lot of things that don't add up right now. We're at a loss. And we are asking for your help to discover who did this, with what weapon, in what room the crime actually took place. Join us October 24th for the start of a new series called Clue. Each week we'll be giving you clues to get you closer to solving the mystery. Each week we'll be getting closer to the truth.
Well, I'm excited, aren't you, if you're not scared? Those rumors about the noises and all that stuff, I won't say anything. Anyway, I'm looking forward to this new series. It's going to be great. How many of you ever played Clue? Remember the game Clue? I don't even know when that was invented. I just know it's been around for a long time. If you haven't played, if you're younger generation, you want to get that game. It's just a fun game. In the game, there's a murder takes place. Obviously, Mr. Body, they call him, was murdered. And you have to discover who did it. And so you have a bunch of suspects like, Colonel Mustard and Professor Plum and Mrs. White, and you have a whole bunch of these suspects. And then you have weapons that are found, and then you have a bunch of rooms that the murder could have taken place. And you have to guess each one of them, and you go around and you investigate to try to figure this out. And as you do it, then you take a guess at the end of the game to figure out if you're the one who figured out all the clues, if you're the good detective. So we're going to be doing that for the next 4 weeks, and we're inviting you into the game to figure out who killed Mr. Body, who did it, with what weapon, and what room. And so if you're not familiar with it, you got to Google around because you're going to have to find some clues. If you want to, what I'd love for you to do is get the game if you don't have the game. And this is a great opportunity to invite some friends down and just say, hey, we're doing this new series at church, and I know church isn't your thing or whatever, but would you come down and just play Clue with us, right? So how cool is that? And you can have a fun night with your friends, play Clue, figure out what it is, and then that will give you some tips to figure out who did it. Because each week what we're going to do is we're going to give you clues. So in the service, it could be anywhere in the service, you're going to get some clues on who did it, with what weapon, and in what room, and you have to guess. And guess what? They're already picked, and they're in this envelope right here. And no, you can't mug me in the parking lot, okay? If you guess this, if you figure this out, we got something a little special for you. But you'll find that out at the end of the series. So glad you're here. We are grateful we are online with you guys, and I know a lot of you watch this during the week, and so glad we're grateful for that. If you're newer to North Point, we want to give a gift to you, and that's a book by Andy Stanley called How Good is Good Enough. And you can grab that right in the back. If you're online, just let us know, and we'll be glad to send it out to you. If you're newer, online is some of our kids stuff. So right on our online site, you can go to the kids tab, and you can watch the kids videos. So I hope you do that with your kids. If you got kids anywhere from like 6th grade and under, there's different stuff for different age levels, so that's great. So make sure you're doing that with your kids. Send it off to friends and family. They can view that during the week as well. And each week, that gets redone. So you get some fresh stuff for the following week. There's also a giving tab on there, and you can just click on that, and it'll take you to ways to give. You can text to give. You can just go on there, and that'll click you to a Secure Give website. It's called Secure Give, and that's a great way to give as well. So we just want to say thank you to those of you who give to this ministry. You make this all happen, and we are really grateful for that. So let's just pray. Let's give thanks to God for this day and what's in store. Father, thank you so much that we can gather here together, that we can not only enjoy seeing each other, or chatting with each other online, but Lord, that we get to be in your presence. I don't know if we can even wrap our heads around that. That you've invited us to come to your throne, to sit before your throne, to stand before your throne, to be in front of the Almighty God. And that just boggles our minds. So Lord, would you help boggle our minds even more? May we not underestimate how valuable this is to be able to come to you. And Lord, in front of you, we're asking for you to do things in our hearts and our minds today. We're asking for you to influence those around us through our lives. That we would just be the vessel, be the person that you're using to really influence other people around us. Lord, thank you for how you blessed our lives. And we want to bless you back. We want to bless your work back and the ministry that you're doing in this world. So allow us to let go of the things we hold dear so that we can see your kingdom grow and many things happen through that. So Lord, thanks for the gifts that have come in. Thanks for those who are already giving or giving now, or those who will come in this week that make everything happen. We want to see your church grow throughout this world. And we thank you that we're a part of that. So Lord, help us to be a big part. Help us to have a big impact. And Lord, that begins with each one of us individually. So do that in our lives. We ask this through Jesus Christ. Amen. So I don't know about you, but I wear sunglasses quite often. Even on a day like today where it's a little overcast or something like that, I have sunglasses on because years ago I got this injury in my eye, a little piece of glass or something like that. And ever since then I just feel like my eyes are a little more sensitive. But so I wear them even in the car, like when you're driving, and even if it's a little dimmer, because I don't know about you, but when the vents in the car, like they circulate in the car, like it bothers my eyes because somehow it just hit my eyes. And again, if you wear contacts, you probably feel it more than others. But so I'm wearing, you wear the sunglasses because it's amazing how even something so small as just like a little breeze coming through the car can affect you, when you're driving like that, or when you're just trying to look, But when you get something in your eye that hurts, well, that really affects our whole lives, doesn't it? We today are wrapping up our series called Right in the Eye, and it's been a great series. I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope you enjoyed Andy for the past couple of weeks. I know he's a great speaker, and he's inspired me so much. But we began this series by looking at literally an R-rated version in Scripture, a story. And some of you were like, wait a minute, I wasn't here, what did I miss? And others of you, I know you went home and read the story because you were like, I can't believe this is all in Scripture, and it is. And we've been looking at the book of Judges, and things were not well. Things are not well as a nation because everybody was going around doing what they wanted to do. It was, the theme of the day. I want to do what I want to do, and I want to do it with who I want to do it, whenever I want to do it. And as long as nobody gets hurt. But somebody always gets hurt, don't they? And a lot of times it's us who gets hurt. But in that process, we hurt others as well. And this is a time of Israel's history where it was dark. It was dark. People did what they want. And the theme, actually the end of the book of Judges ends like this. In those days, Israel had no king. And everyone did what was right in his own eyes. There was no king. There was no authority. They did what they want. And God, he had so much hope for them as a people. He wanted to see so much happen. And yet they wouldn't take the bait. Like it was like, well, yeah, I know, but guess what? And he desired so much for them and through them. And he saw the potential of what they could be. And he wanted them to be different than all the other nations around them. And the tragedy is that they decided to be like all the other nations around them. And they broke his law. And then that would mess them up, and then God would punish them. And then they would cry out, oh no, we messed up, help us. And so God would send them a deliverer. And that's what he did. And a judge would rise up, and he would rescue them. And God just bailed them out. And that's what we expect, because we expect it too, right? Remember when you've messed up? Maybe you were a teenager and that's maybe more vivid in your minds, and you messed up and you called up mom or dad and said, hey, I made a mistake, or hey, you know, the car broke and I don't have enough savings. Can you help me out? Can you give me a little loan, you know? And we did that, you know, and as we get older, guess what? You know, I know my mom and dad aren't around anymore, so it's like I can't call them, right? But we still have that mentality that, you know, if I get in trouble or something, well, God will bail me out, right? I mean, he loves me, he cares about me, right? And so we can easily fall into exactly what Israel fell into. And in the midst of this chaos, this darkness period of history, where everybody did what they wanted to do, there was a God myth, literally, that God has abandoned us. God is not active. God is not at work. Because if he was, he wouldn't let all this happen, would he? So God doesn't care. He doesn't care about me, right, and everything I'm going through. This is what the people believed. But in the midst of the chaos and in the midst of the darkness, while a nation was doing its own thing, God was decorating for Christmas. That's what he was doing. You see, long before Mary and Joseph, God was preparing the way. This is why I think it's good to decorate early for Christmas, because God did, okay? So next week, start decorating. No, I'm a November 1st guy. Like as soon as November 1st hits, Christmas music comes out. We don't decorate yet. We wait a little bit, but I get into Christmas. Why? Because before you know it, it's over. And all of a sudden, we're into January, and it's like, right? So I just why not enjoy the whole Christmas season as long as you can? You know, I mean, we've had years where, you know, we take the tree out. We get a live tree every year. You know, you take the tree out, and there's nothing but a stick anymore, you know? And you've had that, right? Where you're sweeping up the needles, and your vacuum cleaner smells like pine needles for the next 6 months or whatever. You know, it's that kind of thing. So God decorated for Christmas. And what God did was amazing as he's decorating. He chose a woman. And he chose a woman who was bitter. She was angry at God. She was angry because her life circumstances were just a mess. And she blamed him. Maybe you can relate to that. She thought God abandoned her, didn't love her. And that's who he chose. He said, I'm going to work in this woman's life. And then he chose a man. He chose a man that in the midst of a culture that didn't follow God, had no desire to follow God, wanted to do what they wanted to do, a man who said, you know what? Even though I don't see evidence of God at work, even though so many people abandoned him, I'm going to choose to be faithful to him. And I'm going to do what he says. He was not going to give in to the woke of the generation, okay? And so what he did was God brings these two people together into this love story right in the middle of chaos. And it starts out like this. In the days when the judges ruled. This is the time we've been talking about. We've been looking at the book of Judges. This is 330 plus years of history where God desired to be their king, and they were going to be a separate entity, each of them, okay? Because there were 12 tribes of Israel. And each tribe, hey, you could do your own, you could have your own culture and your own customs and all that kind of stuff. And you can, and all 12 tribes. But together we're going to agree to follow God. And we are going to agree to be devoted to God and what he says. And that was so cool. It was a neat thing. And you know, we don't grasp how crazy this is, because America was the first nation to ever try this. And no other nation has tried this since. Where literally individual states go do your own thing, be your own people, but together we'll agree to a certain set of rules and a certain set of beliefs. And that's what made us as a nation, that's what made them as a nation strong, that they were going to do this. But what happened is they didn't do that. They decided instead we're just going to do our own thing. And then things went bad, and they went really bad. And remember what happens when things go bad, right? They would not follow God's laws, so God would punish them because they were doing their own thing. He's like, yeah, that's not what I want for you, but if that's what you want, I'm going to let it happen. So guess what? In the days when judges happened, right? When the judges ruled, there was a famine in the land. And famine is not good. Okay, it's not good for anybody, especially not good when it affects the whole nation. I mean, this is just one little town, this is one little area, this is the whole nation. And this is worse than not having toilet paper, okay? This is bad. People are starving, people are hungry, people can't find jobs, okay? So a man in Bethlehem, in Judea, with his wife and 2 sons, went to live for a while in the country of Moab. To give you an idea geographically of what we're talking about, if you look at the nation of Israel, okay, to the west of Israel is the Mediterranean Sea. North of Israel is the Sea of Galilee, where Jesus spent a lot of his ministry. You have the Jordan River that flows through Israel, and at the bottom is the Dead Sea. On the other side of the Dead Sea is Jerusalem, and that's Judah, that area, okay? On the other side of the Dead Sea, now you're getting out of Israel, is Moab. And so they go from Bethlehem, southern Judah area, over to Moab. They're getting out of their country because they're trying to find work, they're trying to find food, he's trying to provide for his family. The man's name was Elimelech, and his wife's name was Naomi, and the names of their sons were, you're not going to remember them anyway, so I'm not going to say them. But here's the thing. They're going there to find something new, to find something fresh, to hopefully provide for his family. And here they get there, and then Elimelech dies. And she's left as a widow. She has 2 sons, and her sons are getting older, and so she's like, you know what, guys, you got to get married, you got to start families. Let's see if we can start a family here. But here's the thing, they're in Moab now. And the only women there are Moabites. And God forbid the Israel people to marry the Moabites. He didn't want, it's not that God was against foreign women and all that kind of stuff. Basically, God knew that if his nation, his people, would marry those who did not have a belief in God, that people, okay, so you have a household where one of them really strongly believes in God, Jehovah and all that, and part of Israel, and then they marry somebody from another land, the people from the other land, they have their own gods, and they have their own ways, and they have their own practices, and they're going to bring it into the family, and guess what? It's going to break down belief and trust in God. And so this is why God forbid it. He said, look, you can't do that, because it's going to mess things up. And you see that today. I mean, you have friends probably who married somebody who wasn't a believer, and guess what? It doesn't go well. It doesn't go well, right? And so this is why God was protecting them. But guess what? You're in the era of the judges. Everybody did what they wanted in their own eyes. So guess what? Go marry some Moabite women. So they marry Moabite women. So the 2 sons marry women. The first son marries a woman named Orpah. Okay, that's a good name, huh? The other one marries a named Ruth, and that's, a lot of people have had that name. And so the 2 sons are married, things are going okay, and then the sons die. Both of the sons die. So here you have this Jewish woman in a foreign land with 2 daughter-in-laws, and there's no men to provide for them at all. And they're stuck. And what Naomi is feeling is just, God's abandoned me. I'm all alone. I mean, what happened to this God who said he'd protect me? And guess what? He's not around. And it's hard for us to comprehend this because we live in a very different culture. But in that culture, there was not much hope for them as women at all. The only hope was that they could marry some man. Now, Naomi's older already, but there's at least a little hope for her daughter-in-laws. And so she's like, you know what? I guess I got to go back home. So she decides, she still has some family there and stuff. So she encourages her daughter-in-law. She says, you know what? Why don't you guys, you go get married, okay? And you can start a whole new family, and life will be okay for you, okay? But I'm going to go back home, and I'm going to find somebody to take care of me or something like that. And what one of them says to her, and this is so beautiful, Ruth replies to her. Listen to what she says. She says, where you go, I will go. And where you stay, I will stay. And your people will be my people, and your God, my God. Now remember, she's a Moabite woman. She has all kinds of other beliefs, and she grew up with that. And her family probably encouraged her to believe what they believed. And she's ready to walk away from all that. And that's amazing. And and let's face it. I mean, if you had Naomi as your mother-in-law, you would have not been impressed. Okay, she's depressed. Naomi has her view of God is like, he's abandoned me. I don't know if I believe in him anymore. I mean, and who wanted to be around? She's miserable. She's a bitter person. Who would want to be around her? But somehow in the midst of that, Ruth saw something. And listen as she goes on. She says this. She says, where you die, I will die. And there I will be buried. In other words, I'm all in. I got you, Mom. I'm going to take care of you. I don't know how, but somehow I'm going to be with you, and I'm going to take care of you. Now, if any of you have in-laws, okay, some of you can relate. Some of you are like, okay, I have no idea what this is like, okay? But I know we do, because we have we have a son-in-law and a daughter-in-law, and honestly, they're our kids now. We went from 5 kids to 7 kids. And it's amazing. And God forbid if something happened to one of our kids, they would still be our kids, and because they are, you just sort of adopt them. And I could see one of them doing the same thing to us. Like, look, we got you. We'll take care of you, or vice versa. And so this is the kind of relationship she had with her daughter-in-law. And so the 2 women, Naomi and Ruth, they go back to Bethlehem. They travel, and it must have been hard. They probably had very limited resources. But they go back to Bethlehem, and they arrive on the scene, and now it's been quite a long time. And Naomi comes into town, and the people are like, hey, wait a minute, is that Naomi? Yeah, I think that's Naomi. And so they go up to her, and they're like you can read this in the story. And they go up, and they're like all excited, like, Naomi, it's so good to see you, and how's things going? And she's like, she looks at her like, no, don't call me Naomi. You're like, whoa, okay. So she's bitter. Remember, if you ever run into a bitter person, this is what she's like. She's very bitter and probably nasty, okay, because bitter people are nasty. And she says, literally, call me Mara, which means bitter. That's what I want you to call me now. Why? What's going on with it? And this is what she says. She says, because the Lord has afflicted me. The Almighty has brought misfortune upon me. In other words, I feel empty. And I know the stories about God. I've heard them too. But that was a long time ago. And God hasn't done much. And God hasn't done much in my life. And if he's real, he doesn't know who I am. He doesn't know my life. He doesn't care about my circumstances. Because look at what has happened to me. I lost my husband. We had to move away. I lost my 2 sons. There's nothing worth living for. And what Naomi is a small little glimpse of what is going on in the nation of Israel. Because the nation of Israel had come to a point where again, they had for so long done what they thought was right in their own eyes, that God has continually allowed other nations to come in and rise up. He's allowed famine, like they're experiencing now, to come around. And the nation is thinking, where is God? And those are just stories, and you're foolish to believe in a God who cares about you. And this is the life that Naomi is living. Now, while she felt abandoned, God was at work. God's preparing for Christmas. And God is at work in her life. And this is why 3,500 years later, we're talking about her still. Because even though she thought God had abandoned her, she literally is at the center of the story of God. What is happening in the town when she arrives, because this is important to the story, okay, is the barley harvest. Now the barley, if you're not familiar with barley is like a cheap wheat, okay? It is something it's planted in the fall, so it can germinate during the winter months, and then it springs up early in the spring. But it's not as fortified as a wheat, but it's sort of like a poor man's wheat kind of thing. I guess you would describe it like that. But it was, people used it, and the poor used it a lot. And here you have this barley. So farmers would literally do this, so they could pull the barley and then they could plant again. And so what they would do is they would plant these fields, and this is a harvest time for Israel. And this is what they're coming into. They're coming into the barley harvest. According to the law of Moses, which is pretty amazing that they still follow some things, but it was probably like, a lot of cultures where it's like, well, we don't like that, we don't like that, we don't like this, but this is the way we've always done it, okay? And so this was one of the customs, and God put it in through the law of Moses, that when they are to harvest a field, they are only to harvest one field at a time. So they go into a field, they harvest it, but when you harvest a field, part of the law was you are to leave behind some of it, Okay, so maybe at the out, if you ever seen, tractors, they go through the field, it's hard to get the end of the fields because that's just on the outskirts and you don't want to. So it's basically like, leave that, just leave it. And why God put this into play was because there will be people in your culture that are poor. There will be people who are misfortune, like widows. So I want to leave that for them so they could come in. They still got to work, but they come in and they can glean for themselves. And so this is what he does. And so Ruth says to Naomi, look, you got to go and you got to get some food here and stuff, because they had no one to protect them. There was no one watching over them. So Ruth goes into the field and she starts gleaning, like some of the others who show up at the end of the day, and they glean from the fields. And it catches the eye of the owner of the field, because here's this foreign woman in there with these other guys, because the other guys were in there gleaning for their families and stuff like that, if they're poor. And so it catches the eye of Boaz. And Boaz, he owns this land, and he happens to be a relative of Elimelech, Naomi's husband. So it's a distant relative. You don't know that in the story at this point. You'll find that out later if you read the story. But it catches his attention, and he starts asking, who is this foreign woman? Where is she from? What's she doing? He's curious. He's just like, tell me the backstory, right? And so he starts to find out from other people that, okay, so she had this mother-in-law, and she's here with her mother-in-law, and she came here from Moab, and she's taking care of her. So he's impressed with her, and then eventually he engages her in conversation. And this is what he says to her. He says this. He says, I've been told about all that you've done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband. It says how you left your father and your mother and your homeland, and you came to live with a people you did not know before. So you can tell he's impressed with her, right? And that's pretty impressive, that a young woman would leave everything behind and come to a foreign land. Now, this isn't like flying to California to go visit somebody and you just come back to your family. Okay, she's gone. She doesn't have relatives around. There's nobody. The only person she knows in town is her mother-in-law. And then he says something. Now, keep in mind, so she's a foreigner, okay? Her only view of this land is what she's walked into. That's it, and what her mother-in-law told her about Israel. And this is a time that Israel has abandoned God, and God seems to abandon them, and things have been really bad. And this is what he says to her. Listen, he says, may the Lord repay you for what you've done. May you be richly rewarded by the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge. Isn't that great? He's like, so here you have a guy who is so still enthralled by a God who loves and cares and protects in the midst of people who don't. He's basically like, I still believe in this God. And I believe that this God is faithful, and my God, Ruth, I really believe will reward you for what you're doing. Isn't that a great faith? And then Boaz instructs his servants, because again, you're living in a culture, everybody does what they want, everybody is doing their own thing, okay? Nobody has regard for God or his law or anything else. So he instructs his servants, because he's in charge. He said, listen, she is to be protected. She's not to be molested. She's not to be treated badly. And the story goes on further where he's like, and I want you to leave some extra behind for her, okay? So he's watching over her, and this is good, this is great. So her gleaning gets really big. So she comes home to her, her mother-in-law, and she's like, look at all this stuff I got today, and she talks like, what are you doing? Like, that's amazing, right? And so this happens day after day after day, right? And time goes on, right? And she's providing for her mother-in-law. She's providing for herself. They're doing okay. But then her mother-in-law, Naomi, says to her, look, we got to have a little chat here, okay? I'm not going to be around forever. And so you got to go find a husband, okay? Because somebody's going to have to take care of you when I'm gone. And so what you need to find is what is known in that culture as a kinsman redeemer. Now, you're probably not familiar with that, okay, if you're not familiar with Scripture. Some of you may have heard this. Another term that you could use for this in our culture would be an avenger, okay? Some of us like that. We like the Avenger movies, okay? It's the one who comes to your rescue, the one who's going to fight for you. I will be there for you. The best way to describe this is it's a rich relative. It's somebody who you can call on. And we all have them, okay? You may not know them, you may have never met them, but there's but somewhere in our family line, okay, somewhere it's your great aunts, sisters, brothers, husband, or whatever. Somebody out there, okay, has money, okay, and if something ever went really, 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 really bad, okay, you would call them up and you would say, hey, listen, I'm such and such and such and such son or daughter or whatever, and listen, I know you don't know me, they might even not know your name or whatever, but you go call them and say, look, I need to ask a favor. Will you help me and will you bail me out? Okay, this is the way to describe that. And somewhere in your line, if you start thinking, okay, because I was starting to think about this, I was like, man, there's probably a dozen people I could probably call. I feel embarrassed. I probably wouldn't want to call them because that's hard to do. But there's probably a dozen people I could call somewhere in the family that say, hey, look, I know you might be able to do something, right, to get us out. So 4 things that they would do. First is they would protect the impoverished family. So if a family member gets in trouble, they would come pay that bill to get them out of debt. Second is they would repurchase the lost property. So if you have a farm or land that's been in the family for generations, right, and some of you know those stories, or you have family those stories, and you're about to lose it because now they foreclosed on it or whatever, they would come and they say, hey, we want this to remain in the family, so yeah, I'll buy the property and it's fine, that way it stays in the family, okay? Third thing they would do is they would redeem relative souls. Now, I know this is hard for us to grasp, but back in those days, you had to pay your debt, okay? There was no 1-800 reduce my debt, okay? There was no loan forgiveness. There was no government bailouts. If you owed money, you had to pay it, and if you didn't pay it, they took your kids. That's what they did, and your kids were now slaves because they were going to get something from you, and so your kids would be sold into slavery. So the kinsman redeemer would come in and say, okay, I'll buy your kids back, okay, at least for you, so you'd have your family back. So again, hard times. And then 4th thing they would do is they would provide an heir, and this is what's important for the story, because they would provide in that culture, a female heir could not inherit the property. So Naomi did not. She had possession of the property, but not really. So in order for her to inherit that land from her husband, there had to be a male heir that would come in and basically say, okay, I'll sign off on it, and now it could be our land together, but it comes as a package deal, okay? So Naomi needed to find somebody. Well, she's charging her daughter-in-law Ruth to go find somebody who will be a kinsman redeemer for you, so that the land that was in Naomi's family could now become part of their family. But it was a package deal. Now Boaz, who she's gotten to know now, okay, because there's this little romance thing going on, he wants to come in and help. But there's a problem, because he obviously is a man of great wealth, and he has lots of lands, and if he marries her and something happens to him, Ruth now gets part of that inheritance. And that means anybody else in his family that has inheritance now has to share that inheritance with this Moabite woman from a foreign land that Israel wants no part of, right? Okay, so do you understand how tragic this is? So this is not an easy decision for Boaz. It's not like, oh, she's beautiful, I'm going to get the land, I'm going to get everything. No. This is something you really think about. But he wants to help her catch her out. He wants to help catch her, or help her out. So there's another glitch, though. And the other glitch is that there was a relative that was closer than Boaz in the whole lineage thing, right? So they have to contact him. But the other relative would have what's known as right of refusal. So he gets he's like, here's the deal. There's some land for sale. It's in the family. You could refuse it, or you could take advantage of it. So this is a great opportunity for somebody else. Okay, except same thing. If you agreed to buy the land, it's a package deal. So the guy agrees to buy the land. This is what he says. Boaz said, on the day you buy the land from Naomi, okay, by the way, you also acquire Ruth, the Moabite, the dead man's widow, in order to maintain the name of the dead with his property. So it's a package deal, guy. You got to take this. And for this, the same thing. If this guy's looking at this property, and he's saying, okay, this is a great property, I want to get this property. Oh, but if I got to do this, I got to marry her, and then, oh no, if I die and she gets my inheritance, that's going to cause all kinds of family problems, right? So I'm not sure how long he thought about this, but he's basically, this is his response. He's like, nah. At this, the guardian redeemer said, He said, I cannot, because it might endanger, it might endanger my estate. I'm afraid if I do this, my kids are going to be mad at me or whatever. He said, I can't do this. He says, you redeem it yourself. I cannot do it. So he did not want to take the risk. So Boaz does this. And this is at a time where, again, Israel has abandoned the law, but Boaz steps in and he's like, but this is why the law was put in place. That this woman and her daughter-in-law could be cared for. This is why God put this all in place. He says, I'm going to do this. And he takes the role of the kinsman redeemer and he marries Ruth. And Naomi is now cared for the rest of her life. Isn't that awesome? I mean, this is like wow. This is like one of those Hallmark movies where you're like, this is like, the music starts coming in, the credits start rolling, because you're like, man, this is awesome. This is like, wow, what a love story comes together, and everybody's happy at the end, and there's always a death and a marriage somewhere in the Hallmark movie, right? And so this is great, and the story could end there, but it didn't end there, because Ruth and Boaz, they have a son. And the son they name Obed. Now, it's not a name you usually hear around anymore, okay? It means servant of God. Isn't that great? So in a time, this is the end of the era of the judges. At the end of an era where everybody did what was right in their own eyes, they're going to call their kid servant of God. I love it. Because God made a promise, and he's going to keep his promise. And the great part of the story, and you can read this in your story, on your own, because you go back, the book of Ruth follows Judges. So if you're going through the scriptures, you see Judges, then you see the book of Ruth. It's an afternoon sitting. I mean, it doesn't take you that long to read all the story. There's a part of the story where Naomi then holds her grandson, Obed, and she's holding him in her hands, and she recognizes God's blessing in her life. Can you imagine that moment? After all she's been through, she lost her husband, she lost her kids, she's gone through famine, she's gone through all kinds of heartaches. They live basically, sort of like on the street kind of thing, just trying to make ends meet. And now they're living pretty much a life of luxury for them. And now she has a grandson. Isn't that awesome? But time goes on, and Naomi dies, and Boaz and Ruth die. And but Obed has a son, and the son's name is Jesse. That's a good name. I like that name. That's a nice, strong name. I know when we were naming our kids, like, we want a strong name. Something that's just like, Jesse's a good, strong name. He has a bunch of sons. And one day, God speaks to a prophet named Samuel, and he says, Samuel, I want you to go. And this is what he says to Samuel. He says, fill your horn with oil and be on your way. I'm sending you to the Jesse of Bethlehem. Okay, so this is a great-great-grandson, right? He says, I'm sending you, and I've chosen one of his to be what? To be the king. Be the king. Isn't that awesome? And so Samuel shows up at the house. And Jesse's all excited. One of my sons is going to be king. So he lines all his sons up. Samuel comes in. He goes to the first one. Nah, not him. He goes, nah. Goes all the way down the line. He's like, this all the kids you got, right? And he's like, yeah, I got this other son. He's out in the field, Why the other sons weren't out in the field, I don't know. But anyway, so they call in. They call in David. Obed, Jesse, and David. And he comes in from the field, and Samuel looks at him, and God speaketh through him, and he says, yes, this is the one. And he anoints David the second king of Israel. Years later, the prophet Nathan, because Samuel passed on, and Nathan becomes the prophet, speaking into the role of the king, and he comes one day to David, and he says this. He says, your house and your kingdom will endure forever before me. Your throne will be established forever. The house of David, the line of David, will never end, which means that the king, the Messiah, will come from the line of David. The son of Jesse, the son of Obed, the son of Boaz and Ruth. Yes, that foreigner from another land who came in and said, I will follow your God. And from David, and about 25 pregnancies later, okay, here's what happens. Eleazar, the father of Mathan, Mathan the father of Jacob, and Jacob the father of Joseph, the husband of Mary, and Mary was the mother of Jesus, who is called the Messiah. And Jesus was born. And that is how Ruthie and Bo saved Christmas. You see, throughout the life of Jesus, when they talked about him, when the gospel writers wrote about him, they referred to him as what? As the Son of David. Why was that so important? Because that kingdom, that throne will never end. And Jesus takes the throne. You see, not just a baby was born, a king is born. A king that when wise men, astrologers from another land, distant land, got a message, they saw that a king will be born. That's why they came. They didn't come to see a baby, they came to see a king. Herod, who lived at the time, who was the king, was greatly upset. Why? Because another king was born. Pilate, when Jesus, about to face his death, stands before Pilate. Pilate says to him, he says, I hear you're a king. Are you a king? And what does Jesus say? Yep. Yeah, I am a king. But then he says this to him. He says, my kingdom, though, is not of this world. But Jesus leveraged his power and his influence for what? For the kingdom yet to come. Jesus did what no other king has ever done. He said, I'm not asking you as followers to die for me. I'm telling you, I came to die for you. And now will you follow me? And as a king, he then extends that invitation to every one of us to yield our hearts to a creator, to a king. As we wrap up this series, what I want you to consider, what I want you to invite you to, is to choose that kingdom. To a kingdom that works from the inside out, not from the outside in. That we're looking for what's happening inside of us to influence who we are and what God does with us. And instead of doing what I want to do, when I want to do it, with whom I want to do it, whenever I want to do it, as long as nobody gets hurt, it's yielding my throne to his throne. It's inviting Jesus Christ to reign in my life. And for some of us, we have never done that. We've heard the stories about Jesus. We might have grown up in the church. You may say, people might ask you to believe in God. Yeah, I believe in God. Yep. But I've never yielded. I've never given up my throne for him. Because that involves everything. And maybe today is a day you have to do that. And God is impressing upon you to say, I need to yield my throne to his throne. There's a picture in the New Testament. It's a great picture. Where the king, Jesus, is knocking at the door. And it's probably one of the most misinterpreted scripture passages of all time in the Christian faith. It just is. Because Jesus is knocking on the door, not of somebody who is an unbeliever, not of somebody who isn't sure about God or hasn't given their life over to Christ. He's literally knocking on the door of the believer. And he's saying, I want to come in. I want to be a part of your life. I want to reign in your life. And I'm asking you to invite me to do that. You see, because a lot of times in Christianity, what happens is we have this thing, and I don't know if you've ever heard of it, it's the one and done mentality. I gave my life to Christ, and I'm good, and I just want everybody else to go to heaven one day. It's like, wait a minute, how about letting your life be changed and transformed, where we yield our throne to his, where we We say, okay, this isn't my life. This isn't about me now. This is about what you want to do through my life. It's not about just getting into heaven. It's about yielding our life over to him and be used by him, even in the smallest way. Because a lot of times we sit waiting for the big stuff. Say, God, will you give me the big stuff? You call me up like Samuel and say, Samuel, okay, go do this. Then I'll do it. I'm all there, God, okay? But in the meantime, we're like, okay, but I'm not sure. And God will say, man, I want you to yield. You yield to the little stuff, and man, they'll get bigger. Don't worry. But it's the constant yelling. It's the constant listening to the knock of God when he's saying, I want to come in. I want you to yield. And I want you to invite me on the throne of your life and take yourself off of it. Because if we miss that, then we miss the king. Because the king wants to be on the throne. He doesn't want us there. And when Jesus does that, when he knocks on that door, and he's saying, I know there's something you need to let go of. That's what hits us right in the eye. And you know what? It's easier to put on sunglasses to block it so it doesn't bother you, so that we can stay on that throne. But God is inviting us to something great. Because I firmly believe, just like Naomi, that God takes ordinary people who've given up on God, think that, their life circumstances and everything, I know God's there, and I believe, and I'm going to heaven one day, and that's great, and all that kind of stuff, but I just don't believe he knows my name. I don't believe he cares. I don't believe he sees what I'm going through. And God takes that person, and when they're willing, he uses them to change history. And that's what he did with Naomi. And that's what he did with Ruth and Boaz, who gave us Jesus Christ. Father, thank you so much for ordinary people just like us. But Lord, maybe like us right now, we're going through something tough that, Lord, we don't see you at work. We don't understand what you're doing. We're at a loss, maybe even for words. And yet, Lord, you are at work in our lives. So, Lord, would you give us the courage to be faithful even when we see nothing happening? To be faithful as a husband, to be faithful as a wife, be faithful in raising our kids, to love, to honor you, to respect. Be faithful in our jobs, to be used by the gifts you've given us to give to this world so that we can make this world a better place. And yet, Lord, not being so distracted by the things of this kingdom that it hinders us from doing the work of your kingdom. So, Lord, may we see our lives about your kingdom work. And help us to understand what it means to have a king reign in our lives. And we invite you to be our king. And we ask this in the one we thank you for, Jesus Christ. Amen.
Won't you stand? You are here, moving in our midst. I worship you. I worship you. You are here, worship you. You are here, are turning lives around. I worship you. I worship you. You are here, mending every heart. I worship you. Yeah, I worship you, Lord. You are waymaker, miracle worker, promise keeper, light in the darkness. My God, that is who you are. You are waymaker, miracle worker, promise keeper, light in the darkness. My God, that is who you are. You are waymaker, miracle worker, promise keeper, light in the darkness. My God, that is who you are. You are waymaker, miracle worker, promise keeper, light in the darkness. My God, that is who you are. 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 Even when I don't see it, you're working. Even when I don't feel it, you're working. Never stop, you never stop working. Never stop, you never stop working. Even when I don't see it, you're working. Even when I don't feel it, you're working. Never stop, you never stop working. Never stop, you never stop. You are waymaker, miracle worker, promise keeper, light in the darkness. My God, that is who you are. You are waymaker, miracle worker, promise keeper, light in the darkness. My God, that is who you are. 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 You are waymaker, miracle worker, promise keeper, light in the darkness. My God, that is who you are. You are waymaker, miracle worker, promise keeper, light in the darkness. My God, that is who you are. 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 That is who you are.
I want you to think for just a minute, what else you could be doing right now? Now, I don't mean like you could have gone to the park, you could have gone to the lake, you could have been staying home watching TV, or like, oh, you guys in your pajamas still, I know. But what you could be doing right now if we're not for the miracle worker working in your life. Because you realize being here in this moment, whether you're watching online, you're there with us now, it's a miracle that has even taken place. When you look back, if God could just give you a flash of your whole life and everything and all the odds that you'd be here in this moment, that's a miracle. That we are standing here or sitting here, we are worshiping the Creator God. And God invites us to be a part of more miracles around us every single day. So go do that. Don't miss next week. You don't want to miss 1 week of this next series called Clue. Invite your friends, go play Game of Clue, and have a great week. We'll see you next week.